So this is a quick video about how you can use GraphQL in React using Apollo library. What is GraphQL? GraphQL is basically a query language for your API and your backend service. What I have in front of me is a ready-made sample GraphQL API, which is provided by Apollo GraphQL. This is an API for SpaceX. And once you land on this Apollo playground, you will see some options here. Basically, you can navigate. This is a homepage of the GraphQL API. You will find the description about this entire GraphQL API, the endpoint. This is the endpoint, the GraphQL endpoint, and the different operations here. Let's see. So if you click on Run in Explorer, this is where you will get the definition for the API, the entire documentation for the API, GraphQL API. So what we have here is, on high level, we have three operations in GraphQL. We have a query operation, we have a mutation operations, and we have a subscription operations. The query operations are used for fetching the data, any kind of data that you want to fetch from the backend. The mutation operations are used for changing the data in the backend. Then there is a subscription operation where you can leverage WebSockets, mostly WebSockets, to monitor changes, to subscribe to changes on your backend or your data models. So let's see, if we unfold the query operations, we see that there are number of query operations. There are number of query definitions. We have something called capsule query, which takes a parameter of ID and it returns a capsule object. We have something for the capsules, which take n number of parameters and they return a list of capsule. So there is a company query which does not take any parameter and it returns an object of info. So let's try this out. How we would query this. So how can we query this? We would write query. If you are initiating a query, any name for your query, let's say test query. You can name it anything you want, and then the name of the query that we want to execute, and then the fields that we want the backend to return to us. Nice. So if you see, the backend has returned us the fields that we requested. GraphQL promotes the concept of having graphs for your backend API. As you implement your API, you should continue to expand your graph for the API. For example, that means is in this company object that we have, we see there is a linked graph or a linked node of headquarters. And similarly, there's a linked node of links. These are like nested objects, you can say. So if you want to expand on any of the nested objects, we can simply request them in the request only. Yeah, this is how it will be returned. Let me find another query that we can run along our company query in test query. I have a capsules query here, and if I look at the argument set, all these arguments are optionals. If any of the argument is required, they would have a exclamation mark. It would end with an exclamation mark, since none of the arguments are required. So I'll just call capsules and then I'll fetch the ID field on top of it. See, in the response, you'll get the result for the capsules and you have got the response for the company data as well. So if we look at the mutations, we have a couple of mutations here: to delete the user, to insert the user, and to update the user. If we look at the insert user mutation, we can see that it takes an argument of object, which is a required array. And within the array, you cannot have a null, and it should be an object of type users insert input. And it's a required value. Basically, this this null inside the array means that you cannot have a null value within the array. And then it returns you some sort of fields in the response, which is the affected rows. And the exclamation here means that the value of the field will always be returned, and it can never be null. And similarly, it returns you an array of returning with user object. So in this particular playground, the mutations do not work, but I'll give an idea how you can call the mutations. If you look at here, what I've done is I've written the word mutation, and then you can name the mutation anything you want, just like we named for the query mutations, and then we call the insert users, the mutation name, the name of the mutation, and then we pass in the object, which was an array of type insert, which was an array of type users insert input. If we look at the user insert input, we can clearly see that it has ID field, name field, and rocket field, timestamp field, and Twitter field. And none of these fields are required. So these are optional. You can specify any one of them, or like whichever. These fields are optional, so you can specify the fields whichever you want to specify. Then in the output, what we have is we have the affected rows, and then I'm picking a few fields from the returning users. I'm just basically picking up the returning ID. So this GraphQL API in this particular graph, so in this particular playground API, the mutations are not working, therefore we are not getting the data. But this is how you would in general call any mutation. So a very similar concept, we have a concept of subscriptions. So you can look at this GraphQL API. It provides certain subscription APIs, and you can, for example, if you have to subscribe to one particular subscription, you first have to specify subscription, the name of subscription, whatever you want to specify, and then the name of the subscription here. So we are subscribing to users. The user basically isn't taking any required parameters, so I've avoided them. And on the output, I'm just picking up, I'm looking for only the ID and the name field. Again, the subscriptions do not work in this public GraphQL API, but this is how you would go about defining the subscription. Next, we will see how we can create a React project and integrate this GraphQL API using the Apollo Client library, and also auto-generate all the typed queries and the mutations for interacting with the GraphQL API. What we will be doing is we will create a React project using Vite, and we will create a TypeScript project. For that, we need to write npm create Vite at the rate of the name of the project, and if we need to specify a template, we will have a React TS as a template. We'll install the dependencies. Then we'll start the project. Now I have the project open here, and this is my default Vite project. I have the main TSS. This is where the app is basically mounted. I'll remove everything what we have here default. And okay, now we have our basic app ready. The first thing that we need to do is install Apollo Client and GraphQL as a project dependency. The first thing that we need to do is to configure our Apollo provider to point to our GraphQL API. So this is a very basic config for the Apollo provider that we need to add. Basically, we are creating a client here, Apollo client, and we are using the HTTP link, and we need to specify the URL, the backend URL, which will provide the GraphQL API. So the value for this is coming from the documentation. If we look at our documentation for SpaceX API, you can see here there is a GraphQL API which is provided at this URL. So I've copy pasted that URL as a URI, and you need to specify what kind of cache you want to use with the Apollo client. For this demo, I'm using a very simple in-memory cache. So once this is defined, what we need to do is we need to go to our app and wrap our app with the Apollo provider. We'll add the client here. Even at this point, the Apollo client is ready to interface with the API. I have a sample query on my right side where I'm querying the company and I'm pulling the name and the CEO. What I will do on my left side, I will just directly use the client to call this API and return the data. Then I'm writing out the result to the console. Let's see how this works out. See, the data has been returned from the GraphQL API as an object. It has the data and the company and the fields that we have requested, the CEO and the name. All that information is returned from the backend information. Instead of directly using the Apollo client, we can use GraphQL CodeGen to auto-generate hooks for our queries and our mutations. It will also generate proper typed code for our hooks and for our mutations. Let's see how we can do that. This is the homepage for the GraphQL CodeGen, and it supports a variety of projects and variety of frameworks. Not only React, but Angular, Vue, and other frameworks are also supported. So first and foremost, I'm going to install all the dependencies that we will need. I'm not going to install the Watcher plugin for this demo, but you can install it if you want. Once the installation is done, I'm going to init the code generator. I'm going to select that the application is built with React. It's asking for the URL for the schema that I'm going to paste from the documentation. So it's asking for a pattern where it would find the GraphQL schema. So for now, I'm going to just say that whatever is the default, which is the TSX files, we can go with it. It's asking where I would like to write the output. Default is fine. Do you want to generate an introspection file? No. And I'll go with the default for naming the CodeGen TS file. And then it is asking for the command that it can add to the package.json whenever I want to run the CodeGen. So it has generated a CodeGen.ts file. If you look at the CodeGen.ts file, this is a very basic configuration for the CodeGen. Instead of just looking at TSX files, we can look at a couple of more files: TSX, TSJS, files, and GraphQL files, and .gql files. Instead of having the default preset, I like to have my files generated in GQL generator.ts, and I also like to have a TypeScript React Apollo plugin, which auto-generates hooks for your queries and mutations, which you can readily use in your React components. And this is specific configuration for your TypeScript React Apollo, where I'm specifying that I need to generate that I need to use hooks, that I want hooks. So now let's run it. Let me first do npm install if any dependency has changed. One configuration that I find it really handy is to use ignore no documents as true. What this basically specifies is even if there is no definition, GQL definition in my code, it will still attempt to generate the GraphQL. It is really handy when you're debugging problems initially. So let's try to run the CodeGen now. Okay, so these are some plugins that we are using, but we have not installed them. So I'm going to install them. Okay, so now let's see if it has generated any generated code. So if we look at the generated file, it has actually generated a lot of typed code based on our schema definition from the remote GraphQL server. Now let's see how we can use the GraphQL and the CodeGen to auto-generate hooks and mutations for our GraphQL. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component directory, and I'm going to have I'm going to add a company component. So this is our basic company component. I'll add it in my app TSX. This is here. Okay, so here I'm going to actually use this query. I'm going to add GQL, the literal, and specify the query here. So this is what we have. And what I'm going to do then is I will ask npm run CodeGen to auto generate the query based on my definition here. Okay, so let's say now it is generated. We will have use test query. Okay, one thing is that it automatically suffixes your auto-generated hooks with the query suffix. So I'm going to remove it from the query definition. Now it should be okay. Yes, so since we are not passing any variables, so I'll not pass any variables. It returns you the data, which is the actual data, and loading, which is a boolean if things are loading. So then if it is loading, then we are going to return true. Otherwise, we can just return the data from the data. Otherwise, we can just return the data from the result. So it should be data dot company dot name. Again, it should be company dot CEO. So if you look at now, let's see how this is running. See if I refresh my page, there's a loader, and then the data is loaded from the backend. Similarly, for the mutations, I'll show you a quick example on how we can auto-generate mutations using the CodeGen. Although the mutations do not work with this public API, but for the purpose of the demo, I'll quickly show you how you can auto-generate the mutations. So let me just specify mutation test and then I'll say that I want to call insert user. Let me just return affected rows here, and we are taking certain input here. The object is of this, and we are passing it like this. So we'll take this definition of mutations, and I will add it here as GQL, and this is the definition of the mutation. In GraphQL, you specify the variables with a prefix of $sign. So this is basically a variable objects, which is taking an array of users insert input. And then I'm passing that to my actual mutation call, that variable for the value of objects. And I'm only fetching the data affected rows from it. So now I will run the CodeGen and see if it will generate the mutation definition for me. Okay, I need to have a unique name for the operation. So I'm already using test. I will write insert user. So now that I have the mutation auto generated, to use it, I just have to use the hook, which will be use insert user mutation. That's it, and it will return me a callback, which I can call on demand. That would be like this: insert mutation, insert users, and then I can add a button if I want to on click, and on click will do something with the mutation, and let's say add users. So this will call insert users, and it should have variables with the object. Now it should have, now I can call insert users with my variable, which would be, I need to specify first a variable. So there is a variables, and based on that, it will also have, it will show me autocomplete for objects. Then I need to specify my objects. Yeah. So just for the purpose of the demo, I'm not actually calling anything here, but as you can see, the CodeGen will auto generate the mutation, and it will also generate the typings for it. So all the objects, the typing for the user insert, input, and all of that is auto generated using the remote schema definitions. So this is a very brief and quick tutorial about getting started with GraphQL in React using the Apollo client. If you have any questions, do let me know in the comments below.